morning, good day, good evening, whatever it is for you. Welcome to my channel. My name is Alex, and today we're going to talk about the Lindbergh kidnapping. So this is an old case. This is from way back when, pre-World War II, with your Grammy, Pappy, whatever you call those old folks in your house. They know about this case. This is one of those things that is ingrained in like history books and all that kind of stuff. It's scandalous, it's sensational. So we're going to talk about it today from a modern context, and I'll go chronologically and then go all the way to the end, and then I'll leave to the end where I'm going to talk more about my opinion of what I think actually happened. So let's get to it. So let me give you a little bit of context. So the baby in question here is Charles Augustus Lindbergh Jr., and he's this, baby. He's part of this prestigious family. I mean, the parents are rock stars, right? Or before, basically, that was a thing. So you have the father, Charles Lindbergh Sr. He's the one that he's a pilot. He's an inventor. He's a political activist. And the mom, Anna Mara Lindbergh. I mean, she's a co-pilot. I mean, she's a lady that was definitely a pioneer for her time. So the night in question, it started around 9 p.m. allegedly when it happened in March 1st, 1932, in their big home, the Lindbergh home. So it had all the servants there, butler, nurse, and the parents were there. And little baby Charles was there, minding his own business. And then Betty Gow, the nurse, goes into the room, right? And there's no baby there. She notices, okay, there's something going on here. Let me go check with the mom. So the mom was having a bath. She got out of the bath. Betty Gow asked her, do you have the baby with you? And she said, no. So they go in there and they notice the baby's not there. And then they tell the father about it. He comes up there, he checks. And of course, at this point, there's panic. The father goes and gets his gun. He goes over there. He notices in the room there was a ladder leading up to the window, and that there was probably some guy around here that needed to be apprehended. So they wanted to go find this guy. They were looking around, scouring the property, and they couldn't find anything. Really, as the dust settled, they knew they needed some help. So Charles Sr., he ended up calling the police, as well as some of his trusted friends to help him with it. All right, so we got the Hopewell Boroughs Police, as well as the New Jersey State Police. They conduct their investigation right away. So they're searching the property, they're looking around. However, the problem with this is because they're kind of a famous family, and he called people up to help them. You had way too many people on the crime scene, right? Because when you have a crime scene, you need to keep it without any kind of disturbance, without tampering of evidence. I mean, all sorts of things could go wrong. So we have all these well-intentioned people kind of getting on the property, but who knows what's going on? I mean, they're stomping around, and maybe they could have destroyed evidence or messed with some footprints that could have been found. So basically, they couldn't find any fingerprints anywhere, really, not any adult ones anyway, and they couldn't find any footprints. So they were either destroyed, but they pretty much concluded that the alleged criminal had some kind of cloth wrapped around his feet to prevent any footprint on the property. So there's that. That's a speculation. So the main pieces of evidence that they have right now are the pieces of wood that come from the ladder. So this ladder, let me explain it to you. It's like a haphazardly made, kind of unexpertly made ladder made out of pieces. Like, it just wasn't like up to an industry standard, right? It's just some kind of flimsy looking thing, and pieces of it were around the room. So they collected that as evidence, and then also the ransom note. I mean, it's here, take a look at this. I mean, it's kind of strange. You can kind of see like it has that little blotch in the bottom, these circles and everything. But if you look at it, you see it's kind of sloppily written, and it's actually poor grammar, and the words aren't spelled correctly. Ready's spelled without an A, and money's spelled wrong. I mean, it's just a mess. So the very next day, the word has already been out from the day before, but it's gotten to the point where you have the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover. The president. He isn't the president at this time. He's just the FBI director, but he wanted to insert himself into the case too. He said, hey, I got the FBI. We got all our resources, and we're ready to help you out. I mean, it wasn't until later, until the president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, actually sanctioned and allowed the jurisdiction of the FBI to make this their sole jurisdiction. And then by March 4th, I mean, it got even weirder. You have this guy named Gaston B. Means, and he was talking with an Evelyn Walsh McLean. So this lady was a mining heiress. She had all this money, and it seemed like this Gaston B. Means guy saw a great opportunity to probably extort or embezzle money out of somebody. So he saw this as an opportunity to get money from this lady, because this lady, he convinced her that he knew people in the criminal underworld that knew about the kidnapping case. That he was approached weeks earlier that, hey, we're doing a big kidnapping, and he decided not to participate in it. But he had knowledge of where the baby could be, and that he was going to get money from McLean to make the exchange. But of course, it was all fraud. He was an embezzler. McLean was kind of wising up to him and ended up calling the police and then getting him sentenced to 15 years for embezzlement charges. So, of course, the list goes down of who's involved in this case. You have a guy named Mickey Rosner. He's like a Broadway affiliated person who supposedly knows even more criminals that may know about the abduction. And then you have Al Capone, who's injecting himself into this, actually trying to get out of his prison sentence, saying, hey, if I find myself as being instrumental in solving this case, you got to let me out. And of course, nobody took him up on that. I mean, Al Capone, as you know, he's a pretty dangerous guy and, you know, murdered a lot of people himself, or at least ordered the murders. And no way were they going to let him free just for this kidnapping case. So on the ransom note, they requested $50,000, and the New Jersey State Police, they offered $25,000. So it was about $75,000 ransom reward. I mean, that might not sound like a lot of money now, but then that was a lot. I mean, with inflation, that comes to well over $1 million. So this person was probably thinking, hey, I can get myself, you know, set for life if I get this money. So at this point, we're at March 6th, and we're getting a new ransom note in the mail. And this one details an increased ransom demand of $70,000 from the Lindberghs, as well as using someone by the name of John Condon as being an intermediary between the Lindbergh and the criminal perpetrator. So basically, they want him to be the in-between to make the exchanges and to communicate from this point forward. So people are wondering, who is this John Condon guy? Like, where did he come from? So he was a semi-retired teacher from the Bronx in New York, and he kind of put himself on the map, allegedly, by offering $1,000 into the ransom pot to get little Charles Jr. back. But for whatever reason, why he was chosen by them, it's kind of unclear at this point, and actually has led to some suspicions later on in the investigation. So the Lindbergh family gave the go-ahead for John Condon to assume this role. So basically his first role as an in-person visit was actually at a cemetery. So he ended up meeting this guy, he called himself, I don't know, John. So another John here, and he said that he was part of this gang, this criminal gang. So he said he was a Scandinavian sailor. He had a kind of like an accent that kind of matched that description. And that the baby was safe, the baby was on a boat somewhere being taken care of. And John Condon said that, hey, I need some kind of proof that the baby is still all right, so can you give that to me? So he said, yes, I'll give that to you. So actually what they had a few days later, they had a baby sleeping suit mailed to the Lindbergh residence to prove that they had the little baby Charles. So John Condon, by April 1st, he got another letter stating that, hey, it's time to get this ransom exchange made so we can get this going forward. So the Lindbergh family, they wanted to construct this box that hold the money in, right? Like a custom-made box that could be identified later on if they needed to investigate it further. So the interesting thing about this whole situation is during this time, money was had a gold seal on it. So essentially they were called gold certificates. So that means if you went to a bank and you had a gold certificate, which is basically, as you can see here, it's just like what looks like a dollar bill now, essentially, but it has that little marking on it. That means if you take it to the bank, they can give you gold back. And then also there's a serial number on there, of course, that we have now that helps people trace money and how it's spent. So they use this as a means of catching this perpetrator once they got the money and once they, of course, the next day on April 2nd, this is when the exchange took place between John Condon and an unknown identified taxi driver. So they met, they made the exchange. And as I said before, remember we said about $75,000, so that was renegotiated back down to $50,000. So the cab driver just said, okay, let's just take the money, let's just get this over with, and they went on their way. And no baby. So some of you may think, what's going on? Where's the baby? Why do you make an exchange without a baby, right? It doesn't make any sense, but I don't want to get to that yet. I'll talk more about that. All right, so now it's next month on May 12th. You have 2 delivery drivers driving around. Everything's normal for them. Nature calls, they need to go to a tree. You know, they park on the side of the road. They get out. I mean, their names are Orville Wilson and William Allen. So this is around 4.5 miles south of the Lindbergh home. So I'm really not that far at all. So as he's doing his business, everything on the side of the road, he discovers the body of baby Charles. So the thing that's horrible about this is that the baby has likely been there this whole time, right? The baby has been, it's been badly decomposed. There's been obviously some trauma to the head, and of course these guys do what they need to do. They call the police, and actually the nurse, Betty Gao, as we mentioned earlier, that was looking in the room and didn't find baby Charles from the beginning, she was the one that was actually tasked to identify the body based on certain characteristics that only she would know, and maybe the parents. So of course at this point you're thinking, yeah, this was a fraud. There wasn't any baby being brought to them. They were just getting the money and running. So now we're in June 1932. Investigators are thinking, okay, we need to question more. We need to take a look at this from a different angle. So they ask Violet Sharp. She is another servant or housekeeper of the home, and they kind of interrogate her really heavy-handedly. The reason why I say heavy-handedly, because after 3 or 4 times of questioning, she was so distraught that she ended it all with silver polish by drinking it. So it was pretty intense stuff. So they actually got a lot of criticism for that later on in hindsight, saying that, hey, you don't interrogate people like that, especially under those circumstances. It really wasn't the right way to do it. And after all this, you have John Condon saying, hey, I saw that guy. I saw the Cemetery John, the Scandinavian sailor guy. He's out there. I'm going to find him. So there was actually a time where he was chasing after a guy saying, hey, I know you, and trying to, he's just chasing after people. And people thought this guy was maybe a bit of like a flamboyant, maybe just making this all into a media circus, because he was involved in what they call a vaudeville act, which is like a theater play based on the story of the kidnapping, and people thought that was tasteless or lacking tact. And then also he was interviewed for a magazine about his role in the investigation. So people were just thinking, like, what's going on with this guy? This doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But through all this time, you have Charles Sr., he was backing him up and saying, okay, I'll stick behind you. So with the case being at a standstill, investigators were thinking, okay, we really got to stick with these notes. These notes have serial numbers on them. So by notes, I mean the gold certificates we mentioned earlier that can be tracked, because they needed to be returned to all banks, because Franklin D. Roosevelt made an order to return all gold certificates to banks and to be have new money recirculated into the economy. So they did find a few, but unfortunately you had one case in a Manhattan bank where somebody turned in $2,980 of ransom notes, but it was a dead end. The guy lied about his name and his address, and so they went to this address that he mentioned, and it was a dead end. There wasn't anybody related to the ransom there. All right, so pretty much during this period, it's been a 30-month period of trying to trace these notes, and they've been circulated all through New York City. And of course, nobody's gonna tell the truth about their name or their address, so they figured they really needed to figure out a new plan. But actually what worked was really, really smart. What they did is actually on September 18th, 1934, Manhattan bank teller was able to get somebody's license plate associated with those ransom gold certificates. So the way he did this is he kind of noticed he was acting suspiciously, so he jotted down his license plate and confirmed that those were the correct notes, ransom notes. And then he called the police, and they got the guy. They went to his place, and his name was Richard Hauptmann. So Richard Bruno Hauptmann, he was living in kind of like a German Austrian neighborhood of Yorkville. So that is kind of typical, kind of, so far as you can see, is kind of meeting or matching that profile that we discussed earlier. So this profile is a German-based guy, right? He's got that accent, and he's living in a German part of town. So that's one thing that kind of connects them. They scour his home. They find like more than $20,000 of those gold certificates, and they were like in a gas can. So that in those olden days, they had like big gas cans. People could periodically purchase those. And then also you had wood from the attic that was missing. And then later on, when they matched that wood to evidence from the Lindbergh home, it matched that ladder that was constructed. Remember we told you about that ladder that was kind of poorly constructed and was kind of falling apart? I mean, it was the exact same wood. And it's not like one of those things where it's just like on a 4x4 wood that you buy from Home Depot. I mean, this is like stuff that was like very particular wood. It's not something it's undeniable. It was the same wood that was used for that ladder that came from his attic. And of course, these police, they thought, we got our guy. This is it. So what they did is they beat him up a lot and interrogated him very harshly. Of course, you can't do that kind of stuff nowadays. That was just something that he did back then. But he kept on talking about this guy named Isidore Fish. He said it was his friend, and it was this guy that gave the money to him, that it had nothing to do with him. So we'll get back to that later, actually, when we go to trial. First, these are the charges that were brought against Hauptmann. He was indicted for extorting the ransom money from the Lindbergh family, and then also 2 weeks later, he was indicted for the murder of Charles Jr. And then 2 days after that, he surrendered himself to authorities, and then the trial was. So the trial was held at the Hunterdon County Courthouse in Flemington, New Jersey. So it was dubbed the trial of the century. As remember what I said earlier about the spectacle that was created because of how famous this family was? So I mean, you had reporters swarming into town. You had all the hotels booked. You had the flashing lights from the cameras from all of the paparazzi that were there. I mean, it was just craziness. All right, so we already know there is evidence against Hauptmann in this trial. So there you have the pieces of wood, you have the money that had the serial numbers that match the ransom money. I mean, this was circumstantial evidence, is what they said in the trial, because there weren't any testimonies against Hauptmann, because there weren't any people seeing him actually doing anything. They didn't see him crawl up and through the window off the ladder or have Charles Jr. in his possession. So that was the only thing about the case that the defense really had. Another thing that the defense had is they had that Isidore Fish angle. Like I said, that German friend of his that supposedly went back to Germany soon after and actually had died due to tuberculosis. So I guess he was just claiming that he gave his friend some money, and that poor little Hauptmann didn't know anything about it. He was just living his life and just thought, hey, I got all this money, I'm gonna live high on the hog and no problems. And he said that he actually owed him some money, so it was fair game. There was no problem about accepting all this money. So he claimed his innocence, he pled his innocence, and he didn't say anything about, oh, well, somebody made me do it. He just said he had nothing to do with it. Also, his wife pled for his innocence too. She said, oh, my husband couldn't have done that. I mean, he's a good guy. But she said that she didn't actually see this money exchange happen between the friends. But she did say that she did know Isidore Fish and that he was very sickly. But the thing is the prosecution, they just thought, hey, this doesn't make any sense, because one, this guy was dying of tuberculosis, and he was known to have barely scrounged by really with any money. Like, he just wasn't doing well. You would think with somebody with that much money, they would have been able to get better care for their sickness, especially if they're getting close to death. So with deliberations in the jury, I mean, they found this guy guilty. They didn't seem to, it wasn't like an undecided type of thing. The deliberations were fairly quick. They found him guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to death by electrocution on the electric chair. So that was something that his defense team, they tried to appeal immediately. He was saying, I'm innocent, I didn't have anything to do with this, you gotta believe me, but all of his appeal attempts were denied, and they just went ahead with his sentence. So that's pretty much the end for Mr. Hauptmann there. After his execution, of course, there was more conspiracies that kind of came and swirled around in people's minds, and some of them had to do with, hey, this guy was innocent, there was more to this, that he was framed, that this was all Charles Sr.'s doing because they didn't investigate him, that he was pulling the strings with all of his influence to make it look like this guy did it because he had money, he had influence, and this was just some lowly criminal that didn't really have anything to do with it. So that's one theory. Another theory is that, hey, it was an accident, that he hit his head, and that it was just covering up because they didn't want to be embarrassed. It would be an embarrassment for the family, it would hurt their reputation, so they wanted to cover up somehow. And then another idea is that this was part of a kind of a criminal enterprise, and that this guy was the fall guy. Like he was just like the guy that would be easily prosecuted, and the other people can get away with it. And some of my opinion is that probably what happened was, Hauptmann got the baby, but he didn't mean to kill the baby, right? Like it was an accident. Maybe the baby was crying, he was freaking out, he didn't know what to do, he hit the baby on the head, or maybe he dropped the baby out the window. I mean, like a whoops kind of situation, and then he didn't know what to do, so he figured, okay, I gotta do something, because the baby was in a shallow grave, so it kind of looks like he was in a hurry, he was trying to get out of there. So at that point, it's likely, in my opinion, that Hauptmann went about it that way, because he knew that he messed up, and that he had to kind of go at it from a different angle, to collect the ransom money and get away with it, and then have it be just as it is. So those are some of the theories, and actually I would really love if you guys commented below with some of your theories as well, because I'm sure if you talk to your grampy, other elders in your family, they're going to have some stuff. So that concludes this video. This is kind of an interesting story. I mean, with its antiquity and that it being such a kind of a pivotal case. I mean, there was a law created for kidnapping cases, that when somebody does something like this, it becomes federal jurisdiction, particularly when kidnappee is brought over state lines. So they kind of say, okay, this is something that's happened, because usually when something happens like this, usually some kind of legal team gets involved, and they say, okay, how can we prevent this from happening again? So that is some hindsight to think about it. And then also be sure to subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate you guys listening. Then also know that there's going to be more videos to come with these types of cases, and actually more modern ones, more recent ones. So please stay tuned, and you have a good night or good day.